My daughter told me to wait outside her wedding venue like I was some stranger off the street. Not because I'd done anything wrong, not because we'd fought, but because her new stepfather, the man who'd been in her life for 3 years, was walking her down the aisle instead of me. I'm her father. I raised her for 26 years. I paid for her college, held her when she cried, taught her to drive. But apparently, that meant nothing compared to the man who married her mother after our divorce. Standing there in my rented tux, watching through glass doors as everyone I used to call family pretended I didn't exist, that's when I realized I'd been slowly erased from my own daughter's life, and I'd been too blind to see it happening. The phone rang on a Tuesday evening while I was making dinner for one. Just pasta and jarred sauce. Nothing fancy, nothing that required much thought. That's how my evenings had become since the divorce 5 years ago. Simple, quiet, manageable. Emma's name lit up the screen, and I felt that familiar flutter of happiness I always got when she called. My daughter, my little girl, even though she was 26 now and living her own life 2 states away. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, settling into my worn recliner with the phone. "How was your day?" But something was different immediately. Her voice had that tone, professional, distant, like she was calling to cancel a business meeting rather than talk to her father. "Hey, Dad, I need to talk to you about something." I muted the television, giving her my full attention. "Of course. What's going on?" There was a pause. A long pause that made my chest tighten with worry. Had something happened? Was she okay? Was there trouble with the wedding plans? "It's about the wedding," she finally said, and I relaxed slightly. Wedding stress. I understood that. Planning a wedding was overwhelming, especially for someone as detail-oriented as Emma. "What can I help with?" I asked. "Do you need me to call the caterer? Or maybe I could drive up this weekend and—" "No, Dad, it's not that." Another pause. "It's about the ceremony. About the walking down the aisle part." I smiled, thinking about how many times I'd imagined this moment. Ever since she was 5 years old, spinning around our living room in her little princess dress, declaring she was going to marry a prince someday. I'd always known I'd be the one to walk her down that aisle, to place her hand in her groom's, to give her away with tears in my eyes and pride in my heart. "I've been thinking about that too," I said. "I was wondering if you wanted to practice the timing, or maybe talk about what I should say if the officiant asks who gives you away. I've been looking forward to— David is going to walk me down the aisle." The words hit me like cold water. David. Her stepfather. The man her mother had married 3 years ago. I sat there in my chair, the phone pressed to my ear, waiting for her to explain, waiting for her to say there had been some miscommunication, or that this was a joke, or that she meant David would escort her mother to her seat. But the silence stretched between us, and slowly the reality settled in. "I don't understand," I finally managed. "It just makes more sense," she said, and her voice was getting more businesslike by the second. "It keeps things simple for everyone. You know how Mom gets stressed about situations, and David has been so involved in the wedding planning, and he's the one who's been helping us with everything, and it makes sense. Simple for everyone except me." "Emma," I said quietly, "I'm your father." "I know that, Dad. Of course I know that. But David is also—" "David has known you for 3 years. 3 years, Emma. I know how long. He's known me." I closed my eyes, trying to process what was happening, trying to understand how the moment I'd been dreaming about since the day she was born was being handed to someone else like it meant nothing. "Honey, I've been looking forward to this since you were born. This is what fathers do. This is what I'm supposed to do. Dad, please don't make this harder than it has to be." Make this harder? I wasn't making anything hard. I was trying to understand how I'd been replaced in the most important moment of my daughter's life without anyone even asking me how I felt about it. "Can we compromise?" I heard myself asking, hating how desperate I sounded. "Maybe we could both walk you down the aisle. Or maybe I could walk you halfway and then David could—" "No." The word was sharp, final. "That would be weird and confusing for everyone. David is walking me down the aisle, and that's what we've decided." We. Not she had decided. We, her and David. Her and her mother. Everyone except me. "So what am I supposed to do?" I asked. "You'll be there. You'll be in the ceremony. You'll sit with the other guests. Other guests. Like a family friend. Like a neighbor. Like someone with no special connection to the bride at all. Where? I asked. What do you mean? Where will I sit? Another pause. Probably in the back. That way there won't be any awkwardness with Mom's family, and you'll still be able to see everything perfectly. The back. Behind people I didn't know. Behind David's friends and her mother's relatives and whoever else was more important to this wedding than the man who'd raised her for 23 years before David even existed. I remembered 2 years ago when Emma had called me crying about her breakup with her college boyfriend. She'd sobbed into the phone for an hour, and I'd driven 4 hours through a snowstorm just to sit with her on her couch and let her cry on my shoulder. She'd said I was the only person who understood her, the only person who could make her feel safe when everything fell apart. Now I was being asked to sit in the back row like a distant relative who might cause problems if seated too close to the family. Dad, are you still there? I'm here. I know this might be a little disappointing, but I hope you understand. This is my wedding day, and I just want everything to go smoothly. I want everyone to be happy. Everyone to be happy. Everyone except the father who'd been dreaming of this day since she took her first steps. Okay, I said, because what else could I say? What else could I do? Demand to walk her down the aisle, make a scene, ruin her wedding day with my own hurt feelings? Thank you for understanding, she said, and there was relief in her voice. Relief that I wasn't going to fight her on this. Relief that I was going to quietly step aside and let David have my moment. I should go, I said. I have some things to take care of. Okay, I love you, Dad. I love you too, sweetheart. I hung up the phone and sat in my empty apartment, surrounded by 26 years of evidence that I used to matter to her. Father's Day cards covered my refrigerator, photos of Emma and me at her high school graduation, at her college orientation, at Christmas mornings and birthday parties, and ordinary Tuesday afternoons when she'd come over just to spend time with her old man. If you've ever felt like you've been quietly replaced in your own child's life, like you've become an inconvenience in the story you used to be the hero of, then you know exactly how I felt sitting in that chair. If this story sounds familiar, if you've experienced something similar, please hit like and subscribe. Sometimes we need to know we're not alone in these quiet heartbreaks. I walked to my kitchen and looked at the Father's Day card from last year, still hanging on the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a baseball glove. A gift from Emma when she was 12 and thought I was the smartest, strongest, most important man in the world. To the best dad ever, the card read in her careful handwriting. Thank you for always being there for me. I don't know what I'd do without you. What would she do without me? Apparently, she was about to find out. I opened my laptop and started researching tuxedo rentals, because even though I'd been demoted from father of the bride to back row guest, I was still going to be there. I was still going to watch my little girl get married, even if I had to do it from a distance. Even if I had to do it while watching another man stand in my place. I found myself wondering when exactly I'd stopped being her father and started being her biological father. When had David become the dad who mattered? And when had I become the dad who used to matter? The betrayal wasn't dramatic. There was no shouting, no door slamming, no dramatic declaration that she never wanted to see me again. It was quiet and efficient and devastating. It was the kind of betrayal that happens slowly, so slowly that you don't even notice you're being erased until someone calls to inform you that your replacement has been chosen, and your presence, while tolerated, should probably be kept to a minimum to avoid any awkwardness. I sat there until the pasta got cold and the sun went down, trying to figure out how I'd become a guest at my own daughter's wedding. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the last 5 years of my life with Emma, looking for the exact moment when I stopped being essential and started being optional. The divorce had been hard on everyone, but Emma was 21 then, old enough to understand that sometimes marriages don't work, old enough to know that her mother and I splitting up didn't mean we loved her any less. At least, that's what I'd told myself at the time. In those first months after I'd moved out, Emma had actually spent more time with me than before. She'd come over for dinner twice a week, help me figure out how to work the new washing machine in my apartment, laugh at my attempts to cook something more complicated than scrambled eggs. Dad, you can't live on takeout forever, she'd said, standing in my tiny kitchen and teaching me how to make a proper grilled cheese sandwich. Mom never taught you to cook? Your mother had very strong opinions about who belonged in the kitchen, I'd said, and Emma had laughed, the first real laugh I'd heard from her since the divorce papers were signed. Those were good months, close months. I'd thought maybe Emma and I would actually be closer now that we had our own space, our own time, our own traditions that didn't have to include her mother's constant management of every family interaction. Then her mother started dating David. At first, Emma barely mentioned him. "Mom's seeing someone," she'd said casually over dinner at my apartment. "Some guy from her work. Seems nice enough." I'd felt a stab of something. Jealousy, maybe. Or just the weird displacement of knowing that someone else was sitting in my spot at the dinner table I'd bought, in the house I'd helped pay for. But I'd nodded and said something appropriate about hoping her mother was happy. "Are you dating anyone?" Emma had asked, and I'd shaken my head. "Not really interested right now," I'd said. "I'm still figuring out this whole living alone thing." She'd smiled and reached across my small table to squeeze my hand. "You're doing great, Dad. Really. This apartment is perfect for you." Perfect for me. A one-bedroom apartment with thin walls and a view of the parking lot, but she'd said it like she meant it, like she was proud of me for landing on my feet. 6 months later, David moved in with Emma's mother. "It makes sense," Emma had explained when I'd expressed surprise that things were moving so fast. "They're both adults, they know what they want, and honestly it's nice for Mom to have someone around." The house felt so empty after you left. The house felt empty after I left. Not after we split up, or after the divorce. After I left. Like I'd abandoned them instead of being asked to leave. But I'd nodded and said something about being happy for her mother, because what else could I say? That I was bothered by how quickly I'd been replaced? That it stung to know that another man was sleeping in my bed, eating breakfast at my kitchen table, taking care of the small repairs around the house that I used to handle? The changes started small. Our Sunday dinners had been a tradition since Emma was in high school. Every Sunday at 6, she'd come to wherever I was living and we'd cook something together, or order takeout and watch a movie, or just talk about her week. It was our time. Sacred time. "I can't make it this Sunday," she'd said during one of our regular phone calls. "David is making this amazing lamb dish, and he invited me and Mom to be his taste testers. Rain check?" Rain check. For the first time in 8 years, our Sunday dinner was a rain check. "Of course," I'd said. "That sounds fun." And it probably was fun. More fun than my apartment and my limited cooking skills and my questions about her job and her friends and her life. The next Sunday, she couldn't make it either. David had gotten tickets to a concert. The Sunday after that, David was teaching her to play tennis. "We should reschedule these dinners," Emma had said eventually. "Maybe right. Maybe make them monthly instead of weekly. That way we can plan better around everyone's schedule." Everyone's schedule, meaning hers, her mother's, and David's. My schedule apparently was assumed to be completely flexible, monthly. Sunday dinners became monthly, Saturday dinners became occasional weeknight coffee dates that got postponed more often than they happened. "Sorry, Dad, David surprised us with a weekend trip to the lake house." "Can't do coffee this week. David's son is visiting and we're doing a whole family thing." Family thing. David's son, a kid he saw every other weekend, was part of the family thing, but these family things never seemed to include me. I started noticing other changes too. Emma's birthday had always been a big deal for us. I'd take the day off work, plan something special, make sure she knew how important she was to me. The year after David moved in, she'd mentioned casually that David was planning something. "Oh," I'd said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Should I plan something too, or do you want to combine celebrations, or—" "Maybe we could do something the day before," she'd suggested. "That way I can have birthday time with everyone." Everyone. David got her actual birthday. I got the day before. I'd taken her to the same restaurant we'd been going to for her birthday since she was 16. She'd seemed distracted, checking her phone more than usual. "David sent me the sweetest text," she'd said, showing me a picture of an elaborate cake he'd apparently spent all day making. He's never made a cake before, but he wanted to do something special. Something special. I looked across the table at my daughter, who was glowing with happiness about this man's thoughtful gesture, and I realized that my own thoughtful gestures had become routine, expected, background noise. When Emma got her first apartment after college, I'd offered to help her move. "Don't worry about it, Dad," she'd said. "David has a truck." David has a truck. I had a sedan and 25 years of experience helping Emma move her life from one place to another. High school bedroom to college dorm to sorority house to her first apartment. But David had a truck. I could still help, I'd offered. Many hands make light work, right? "It's really not necessary," she'd said. "David's got it handled. But maybe you could come over once I'm all settled and see the place." Once she was settled. Once David had helped her create her new life in her new space, then I could come visit and admire what they'd accomplished together. I'd driven past her new apartment building on moving day. I couldn't help myself. I'd seen David's truck parked outside, loaded with Emma's furniture and boxes, and I'd sat in my car across the street feeling like a stalker, like a stranger watching other people live the life I used to be part of. Each replacement felt reasonable at the time. David was handy, so he helped with home repairs. David had a truck, so he helped with moving. David was a good cook, so he hosted the family dinners. David played tennis, so he became Emma's tennis partner. I wasn't being replaced by someone better. I was being replaced by someone more convenient. Someone who came without the baggage of a failed marriage, without the reminder of a family that had fallen apart, without the complicated emotions of a relationship that had 25 years of history behind it. David was starting fresh with Emma. I was carrying 25 years of being her father, and somehow that had become a disadvantage instead of an asset. The holidays were the hardest part. Christmas had always been sacred in our family. Even during the worst years of the marriage, Emma's mother and I had put aside our problems to make Christmas magical for Emma. After the divorce, we'd worked out a system. Christmas Eve with me, Christmas Day with her mother. It wasn't perfect, but it felt fair. The first Christmas after David moved in, Emma had called to let me know about a change in plans. "We're all going to do Christmas together this year," she'd said, and for a moment my heart had leaped with hope. Together, all of us. Maybe this blended family thing could actually work. "Mom thought it would be nice to have everyone together at the house," Emma had continued. "David's son will be there too, so it'll be like a real family Christmas." A real family Christmas. At the house where I used to live, with the man who'd replaced me, celebrating the holiday I'd helped make magical for 24 years. "Where do I fit in this plan?" I'd asked. "You'll come for dinner," she'd said. "It'll be great. David is making his famous prime rib." His famous prime rib. I'd been making Christmas dinner for my family for decades, but David's prime rib was apparently an upgrade worth celebrating. I'd gone to that dinner. I'd sat at my old dining room table, in a chair that wasn't my usual spot, eating food I hadn't prepared, listening to David tell stories about his Christmas traditions and his family's recipes and his plans for making this holiday special for everyone. Emma had been radiant with happiness. Her mother had been more relaxed than I'd seen her in years. David's son had been polite and funny and charming, and I'd been the guest, the person who was graciously included in someone else's family celebration. After dinner, David had suggested they take a family photo by the Christmas tree, the tree I'd helped pick out and decorate for 15 years, in the house I'd lived in for 18 years. "Should we get one with everyone?" the photographer, Emma's friend who'd been enlisted for the task, had asked. There'd been a moment of awkward silence, everyone looking at everyone else, trying to figure out how to handle the presence of the ex-husband in the family photo. "Maybe a few different combinations," Emma had finally said diplomatically. They'd taken photos of the new family, Emma, her mother, David, and David's son. They'd taken photos of just Emma and her mother. They'd taken photos of Emma with David. And then, almost as an afterthought, they'd taken one photo of Emma and me. One photo out of dozens. Sitting in my apartment that night, looking at the pictures Emma had texted me from the evening, I'd realized that I'd become a footnote in my own daughter's story. The biological father who was politely included when convenient, carefully managed when not. I'd been slowly, quietly, efficiently replaced. And the worst part was, I'd let it happen without even realizing what was occurring. Now, lying in bed after Emma's phone call about the wedding, I finally understood the pattern I'd been too hurt, or too proud, or too hopeful to see before. David wasn't just dating Emma's mother, he was becoming Emma's father, and I was becoming the man who used to be. 3 weeks later, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror adjusting a bow tie I'd bought specifically for this day. The tuxedo was new too. Not rented, purchased. I'd told myself it was practical, that I might need it for other formal occasions, but the truth was, I'd wanted everything to be perfect for Emma's wedding day, even if I was only going to be a spectator. The drive to the venue took 2 hours, and I spent most of it thinking about the last time Emma and I had talked about weddings. She'd been 16, and we'd been watching some romantic comedy on television where the father walked his daughter down the aisle in a cathedral with hundreds of guests and a full orchestra. "Is that what you want for your wedding?" I'd asked her. "All the fancy stuff?" She'd curled up next to me on the couch, sharing my bowl of popcorn. "I don't care about any of that," she'd said. "I just want you to walk me down the aisle. That's the only part that matters. The only part that matters." Those words had stayed with me through her teenage years, through college, through her first serious relationships. Whenever I worried about paying for a wedding, or wondered if I'd like whoever she eventually chose to marry, I'd remember that moment. The only part that matters is walking her down the aisle. The wedding venue was beautiful, an old mansion with gardens and a view of the lake. I'd never seen it before, never been consulted about the choice, never been asked if I thought it was appropriate or affordable or the kind of place Emma had always dreamed about. I'd learned about the location the same way I'd learned about most of the wedding details, through casual mentions in phone conversations, or from photos Emma posted on social media, or from details she'd share with the assumption that someone else had already filled me in. "The venue is amazing," she'd said during one of our brief catch-up calls. "David found it. He has such good taste." David found it. David had good taste. I'd been quietly funding Emma's education and her post-college life, contributing to her savings account for years, so she could have the wedding she wanted, but David was the one with good taste who found the perfect venue. I parked my car in the lot and walked toward the entrance, carrying the gift I'd spent weeks choosing. A silver picture frame engraved with Emma's initials and wedding date, something she could use to display a photo from the day. Something small but meaningful, something that wouldn't compete with whatever elaborate gifts David might have contributed. Other guests were arriving too, people I didn't recognize, friends from Emma's new job, college friends I'd never met, relatives from her mother's side of the family who'd never particularly liked me, even when I was married to their sister. I'd expected to feel sad. I'd prepared myself to feel left out, maybe a little sorry for myself. What I hadn't expected was to feel like an intruder. A young man in a suit approached me near the entrance. "Are you with the bride or groom?" he asked cheerfully. "The bride," I said. "I'm her father." He consulted his clipboard. "Name?" I gave him my name and watched him scan the list, his finger moving down page after page of guests. "Here you are," he said finally, his tone slightly puzzled. "You're seated in Section C." Section C. I didn't know what that meant, but it didn't sound like the front row. "Could you tell me where Section C is?" I asked. "Sure. You'll go through the main doors, past Sections A and B, and Section C is in the back half of the seating area. Rows 12 through 18. Rows 12 through 18. In the back half. Past the important people, past the people who mattered, past the people who belonged to the real family." I followed his directions through the beautifully decorated space, past rows of elegant chairs with white ribbons and small bouquets attached to the end of each row. Sections A and B were filling up with people I didn't know. David's family, Emma's mother's extended family, friends of the groom's parents. Section C was less decorated. The chairs were the same, but there were fewer flowers, fewer ribbons, fewer signs that this was where anyone important was supposed to sit. I found my assigned seat, row 14, near the aisle, which I supposed was something. At least I'd have a clear view of the ceremony. At least I'd be able to see my daughter get married, even if I'd be watching it from the same vantage point as distant cousins and college acquaintances. The woman next to me introduced herself as a friend of Emma's from work. She was lovely, chatty, excited about the wedding. She had no idea she was sitting next to the bride's father, and I didn't tell her. It seemed easier that way. "How do you know Emma?" she asked. "We go way back," I said, which was true enough. 20 minutes before the ceremony was supposed to start, I saw Emma's mother walking through the venue, checking details, making sure everything was perfect. She looked beautiful, more relaxed and happy than I'd seen her in years. She was wearing a dress I'd never seen before, something elegant and expensive that David had probably helped her choose. She spotted me from across the room and made her way over. As she got closer, I could see her expression change from general happiness to the careful, controlled smile she'd perfected during our last few years of marriage. "Thank you for coming," she said when she reached my row, "and thank you for understanding about all of this." Understanding. Everyone kept thanking me for understanding, as if I'd been presented with a reasonable situation that any rational person would accept gracefully. "Emma looks beautiful," I said, because it seemed like the safest response. "She does. David helped her choose the dress. He has such an eye for these things." David helped her choose her wedding dress. The dress I'd been planning to see for the first time when she walked down the aisle, the moment every father dreams of, seeing his little girl transformed into a bride. But David had been there for that moment too. David had been consulted, had given his opinion, had helped make one more decision that used to be mine to share. "I'm glad she's happy," I said, and I meant it. Despite everything, despite feeling like an outsider at my own daughter's wedding, I was glad Emma was happy. She is. David has been so good for her, so good for all of us, really. I don't know what we would have done without him these last few years. What we would have done without him, not what they would have done. We, the family unit that now included David and excluded me. "I should get back to the bridal suite," she said. "The ceremony will be starting soon." She leaned down to give me a brief, awkward hug, the kind of hug you give to distant relatives or family friends. Not the kind of hug you give to someone who used to be your husband, who used to share your life, who used to be part of every important moment in your daughter's story. "Enjoy the ceremony," she said, as if I were a guest who might or might not appreciate the entertainment. After she left, I sat in my chair in row 14 and watched the last few guests find their seats. I watched David's family fill up the front rows on the groom's side. I watched Emma's mother's family settle into their assigned spots in Section A. I watched David himself appear at the altar, looking handsome and confident, and like he belonged exactly where he was. Then I saw David's son, the boy who'd been at Christmas dinner, the boy who was part of the family things that didn't include me. He was older now, maybe 15, and he was wearing a tuxedo identical to David's. He took his place next to his father, clearly serving as best man or groomsman or some other role of honor. David's son was standing at the altar in my daughter's wedding. David's son had a role in this ceremony. David's son belonged there. And I was sitting in row 14, behind people who barely knew Emma, watching my own daughter's wedding like a stranger who'd been lucky enough to get an invitation. The music started, not the traditional wedding march, but some song I'd never heard before. Something that apparently had special meaning to Emma and her fiancé, something they'd chosen together, something that didn't include any reference to the father who was supposed to be proud and emotional and ready to give away his little girl. The bridal party started their procession down the aisle. Bridesmaids I didn't recognize, earring dresses I'd never seen, carrying flowers I hadn't been consulted about, walking to music that was foreign to me. And then Emma appeared at the back of the aisle. She looked beautiful, more beautiful than I'd ever seen her, radiant and happy and perfect in every way. The dress was elegant, classic, exactly the kind of thing she'd always said she wanted to wear on her wedding day. David was next to her, offering his arm, looking proud and paternal and like he'd been preparing for this moment his entire life. Maybe he had been preparing. For the 3 years he'd known Emma, maybe he'd been looking forward to this day. Maybe he'd been thinking about how honored he was to be chosen for this role. I'd been preparing for 26 years. I watched my daughter walk down the aisle on another man's arm, and I realized I was witnessing the final, official transfer of my role to someone else. This wasn't just a wedding ceremony. This was Emma's public declaration that David was her father in every way that mattered, and I was just the man who used to be. The ceremony was beautiful. Everything Emma had dreamed of. The officiant spoke about love and commitment and the joining of two families. Emma and her fiancé exchanged vows they'd written themselves, personal and touching and full of references to their shared future. When the officiant asked who gave the bride away, David stepped forward and said, "Her mother and I do," in a voice that carried clearly through the venue. Her mother and I, not her family, not her parents, her mother and David. I sat in row 14, surrounded by strangers, and watched the most important moment of my daughter's life happen without me. After they were pronounced husband and wife, after the kiss, after the cheers and applause, the wedding party made their way back down the aisle. Emma was glowing with happiness, holding her new husband's arm, smiling at the faces in the crowd. Her eyes found mine as she passed my row, and for just a moment she smiled at me. A real smile, warm and genuine and full of love. But she didn't stop. She didn't break from the procession to hug me or include me in the moment. She just smiled and kept walking, following her husband and her wedding party and David toward whatever came next. I remained in my seat as the guests filed out toward the reception, and I realized that I'd just watched my daughter get married, and I'd never felt more alone in my life. The reception was held in a tent behind the mansion, decorated with lights and flowers and elegant table settings that must have cost more than I made in a month. I'd contributed to Emma's wedding fund for years. adding money to her savings account every birthday and Christmas. But looking at the elaborate setup, I realized my contributions had been just one small part of a much larger budget. A budget that David had apparently helped plan and coordinate. I found my assigned table. Table 12, near the back of the tent, close to the service entrance where the catering staff moved in and out with trays of food and champagne. My table mates were a mix of people I didn't know, co-workers of Emma's I'd never met, college friends who looked vaguely familiar from photos, and one elderly couple who turned out to be neighbors of Emma's mother and David. "How do you know the happy couple?" asked the woman sitting across from me. She was probably in her 70s, wearing an elegant dress and expensive jewelry. "I'm Emma's father," I said. Her face lit up with recognition and warmth. "Oh, how wonderful. You must be so proud. Emma is such a lovely girl, and David has been just wonderful with her. Like a father to her, really." Like a father to her. I smiled and nodded, because what else could I do? Explain that I was actually her father, that David was the replacement, that this lovely woman had just unknowingly stabbed me in the heart with her innocent observation? "Yes," I said. "She's very special." "David talks about her all the time," the woman continued. "He's so proud of how she's turned out. He says she's the daughter he never had." The daughter he never had. Emma was the daughter he'd acquired after 23 years of someone else doing the hard work of raising her. Dinner was served, and I found myself picking at food I couldn't really taste while listening to conversations about people and events I knew nothing about. Everyone at my table had stories about Emma and David, about family gatherings I'd never attended, about holidays and birthdays and ordinary moments that had happened without me. "Remember when Emma and David went on that father-daughter camping trip last summer?" one of her co-workers said. She came back with the funniest stories about David trying to start a campfire. Father-daughter camping trip. Emma had never mentioned any camping trip to me. She'd never asked me to go camping, never suggested we might do something like that together. "That was when she decided to surprise him with the adoption papers for his birthday," someone else added. The conversation paused while I tried to process what I'd just heard. "Adoption papers?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Oh, you didn't know?" the coworker said, looking uncomfortable suddenly. "Emma had her name changed to David's last name, legally adopted. It was going to be a surprise for everyone, but I guess it's not really a secret anymore since the wedding invitations had her new name on them." The wedding invitations. I looked down at the program I'd been given when I arrived, and there it was. "Emma Richardson Davis and Michael Thompson request the honor of your presence." Richardson Davis. Emma's mother's maiden name hyphenated with David's loss. To name my last name, the name I'd given her when she was born, the name she'd carried for 26 years, was gone. She'd legally changed her name to remove any trace of me and add David instead. I excused myself from the table and walked outside, needing air, needing space to process what I'd just learned. Emma had not only replaced me in her wedding ceremony, she'd replaced me in her identity. She was no longer my daughter in any legal or official sense. The night air was cool, and I stood behind the catering tent, trying to collect myself, trying to understand how my entire relationship with Emma had been erased and rewritten without anyone even telling me it was happening. Inside the tent, I could hear the band starting to play, and I knew what was coming next. The first dance, the mother-son dance, and then the father-daughter dance. I walked back inside and returned to my seat at table 12, steeling myself for what I was about to witness. Emma and her new husband took the dance floor for their first dance as a married couple. They looked beautiful together, happy and in love and perfect. I clapped along with everyone else, genuinely happy for her despite the pain that was sitting like a stone in my chest. Then the band announced the mother-son dance, and Emma's new husband danced with his mother, a sweet, traditional moment between a son and the woman who'd raised him. "Ladies and gentlemen," the bandleader announced, "please welcome Emma and her father David to the dance floor for the father-daughter dance." Father-daughter dance, Emma and her father David. I watched from table 12 as my daughter walked onto the dance floor with the man who'd been in her life for 3 years. David looked proud and emotional, like he was fighting back tears. Emma was radiant, smiling up at him with pure love and gratitude. The song started. "My Girl" by The Temptations, a classic father-daughter dance song. A song I'd always imagined we'd dance to at her wedding, but it wasn't our song. It was their song, Emma and David's song, a song that belonged to their relationship, their bond, Their version of the father-daughter story that had somehow replaced mine entirely. I couldn't watch. I got up from my table and walked outside again, past the catering staff, past the guest parking area, to the edge of the property where the manicured gardens met the natural woods. I could still hear the music from the tent, could still hear the laughter and applause as other guests celebrated this beautiful moment between Emma and her father. Her father, not her stepfather, not her mother's husband, her father. I pulled out my phone and called my brother Mike. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, how's the wedding?" he asked. "I need to talk to someone," I said, and my voice cracked on the words. "What's wrong? What happened?" "I'm not her father anymore," I said, and then I started crying. Not angry tears, not frustrated tears, but the deep, exhausted sadness of a man who'd just realized he'd lost the most important relationship of his life without even knowing it was slipping away. "What do you mean?" Mike asked. I told him about the ceremony, about sitting in row 14, about watching David walk Emma down the aisle. I told him about the name change, about the father-daughter dance, about feeling like a stranger at my own daughter's wedding. "She replaced me," I said. "Completely, legally, emotionally. I'm not her father anymore. David is her father, and I don't know what I am." "You're her biological father," Mike said. "That can't be changed. But that's all I am now, just biology. Just the guy who contributed DNA 26 years ago. David is the one who matters now. David is the one she calls father. David is the one who walked her down the aisle and danced with her and gets to be proud of the woman she's become." Mike was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry," he finally said. "I don't know what to say. This is heartbreaking." "The worst part is that everyone thinks this is normal," I said. "Everyone thinks it's wonderful that David stepped up, that he loves Emma like his own daughter, that they have such a special bond. And it is wonderful, I guess. But what about me? What about the 23 years I spent raising her? What about the fact that I was her father first? Have you talked to Emma about how you feel?" "How can I? It's her wedding day. She's happy. Everyone's happy. How can I tell her that her happiness is breaking my heart? How can I tell her that watching her choose David over me is the most painful thing I've ever experienced?" "Maybe not today," Mike said, "but maybe soon. Maybe you need to have a conversation about where you fit in her life now." Where I fit in her life. That was the question, wasn't it? Where does the replaced father fit in the story of his daughter's life? I spent another 20 minutes outside, trying to compose myself, trying to figure out how to go back inside and finish being a guest at my daughter's wedding. When I returned to the tent, the formal dances were over and the party was in full swing. Emma was laughing with her bridesmaids. Her new husband was dancing with his groomsmen, and David was holding court at the head table, telling stories that were making everyone laugh. I returned to table 12 and tried to participate in the conversations around me, tried to smile and nod and act like I belonged there. But I felt like a ghost, like someone who was present but not really part of what was happening. Later in the evening, Emma made her way around the room, thanking guests for coming, hugging people, taking photos. When she reached my table, she smiled brightly and gave me a warm hug. "Dad, I'm so glad you're here," she said. "Are you having fun?" "It's beautiful," I said. "You look beautiful. I'm very happy for you." "Thank you. And thank you for being so understanding about everything. I know some of the arrangements might have been different than what you expected. Different than what I expected. I'd expected to walk her down the aisle. I'd expected to be introduced as the father of the bride. I'd expected to dance with her, to give a toast, to be acknowledged as someone who mattered in her story. Instead, I'd been a spectator to the most important day of her life. "I just want you to be happy," I said, which was true. "I am happy," she said. "So happy. And David has been incredible through all of this. I don't know what we would have done without him." We. There it was again. The we that included her mother and David, but not me. She hugged me again and moved on to the next table, leaving me sitting there with the realization that I'd just attended my daughter's wedding as a guest. Not as her father, not as someone who mattered, just as someone who used to be important, back when that used to count for something. The rest of the reception passed in a blur of moments that felt both surreal and painfully real. I was there, but I wasn't really there. I was present, but not participating. I was watching my daughter's wedding reception like someone who'd accidentally wandered into a stranger's party. Around 10 o'clock, The band announced that it was time for toasts. I'd written something weeks ago, back when I'd assumed I'd be asked to speak at my daughter's wedding. I'd spent hours crafting words about watching Emma grow up, about being proud of the woman she'd become, about welcoming her new husband into our family. Our family, as if we still had one. The best man spoke first, one of the groom's college friends who told funny stories about bachelor parties and shared embarrassing photos that made everyone laugh. Then Emma's maid of honor spoke, talking about their friendship since high school and how perfect Emma and her fiancé were together. Then David stood up. "I'd like to say a few words," he announced, and the room fell quiet with anticipation. He cleared his throat and looked out at the crowd, his eyes settling on Emma and her new husband at the head table. 3 years ago, I fell in love with an amazing woman, he began, nodding toward Emma's mother. But I also gained something I never expected, a daughter. The crowd made soft, appreciative sounds. Someone said "aw" loud enough for everyone to hear. "Emma," David continued, looking directly at her, "you have brought so much joy into my life. Watching you graduate from college, helping you find your first apartment, being there for all the ups and downs of your 20s, it's been the greatest privilege of my life." He paused, visibly emotional, and Emma was tearing up at the head table. "When you asked me to walk you down the aisle today, I was honored beyond words. But more than that, I was grateful. Grateful that you've allowed me to be part of your story. Grateful that you've trusted me with one of the most important moments of your life." The room was completely silent except for the soft sounds of people sniffling and dabbing at their eyes. "You are an incredible young woman," David continued. "Smart, kind, funny, ambitious, everything a father could want in a daughter. And while I may not have been there for your first steps or your first words, I hope I can be there for many more of your firsts in the years to come." He raised his champagne glass. "To Emma and Michael, may your marriage be filled with love, laughter, and all the happiness you both deserve." Everyone stood and raised their glasses, clapping and cheering and toasting the happy couple. Emma was crying happy tears, her new husband had his arm around her, and David looked like the proudest father in the world. I remained seated at table 12, clapping along with everyone else, but feeling late. I was watching this moment from behind a glass wall. Everything David had said was true. He had helped Emma through her post-college years. He had been there for the ups and downs of her 20s. He had earned the right to walk her down the aisle through 3 years of consistent presence and support. But I'd been there for the first 23 years. I'd been there for her first steps and first words and first day of school and first heartbreak and first job interview. I'd been there for homework help and driving lessons and college visits and career advice. Where was the acknowledgement of those years? Where was the recognition of the foundation I'd helped build, the foundation that had made Emma into the woman David was now so proud to call his daughter? After David's toast, the bandleader looked around the room expectantly. "Are there any other family members who'd like to say a few words?" This was my moment. This was when I should stand up, walk to the microphone, and give the toast I'd prepared. This was when I should reclaim my place in Emma's story, remind everyone present that I'd been her father long before David arrived on the scene. But I looked at Emma's face, glowing with happiness, still wiping away tears from David's beautiful words. And I realized that standing up now would only make things awkward, would only remind everyone that there was complicated family history here, that Emma had 2 fathers, that this perfect day had some messy emotional undertones. I stayed in my seat. The moment passed, the band started playing again, and people returned to their conversations and dancing. I'd missed my chance to speak at my daughter's wedding, or maybe I'd never had a chance at all. Maybe the toast portion of the evening had been planned around David's speech with no expectation or invitation for me to participate. Maybe I was supposed to understand. That David's words were sufficient, that his version of Emma's story was the one that mattered now. Around 11 o'clock, the photographer started organizing family photos. This was something I'd been dreading all evening, the inevitable awkwardness of figuring out where I belonged in the official record of Emma's wedding day. "Let's start with the bride's immediate family," the photographer announced cheerfully. Emma, her mother, and David positioned themselves in front of a beautiful backdrop the photographer had set up. They looked perfect together. A complete family unit, happy and natural and right. "Beautiful," the photographer said, taking several shots. "Now let's add the extended family." Emma's mother's parents and siblings joined the group. Then David's son stepped into the photo. Then some cousins I recognized from years of family gatherings back when I was part of the family. I watched from across the room, wondering if I should approach, wondering if I was supposed to be included in extended family, wondering if anyone would notice or care if I just stayed where I was. The photographer seemed to notice me standing uncertainly at the edge of the group. "Are you family?" she asked. "He's Emma's father," someone said before I could answer. "Oh." The photographer looked confused for a moment, clearly trying to figure out the family dynamics. "Would you like to join this photo?" I looked at Emma, waiting for her to make the decision. She looked back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not unwelcoming, but not enthusiastic either. "Maybe we could do some separate photos too," Emma said diplomatically. "You know, different combinations." Different combinations. Translation: photos with the real family, and then some awkward additional photos that included the complicating factor of the biological father. I joined the group for a few shots, standing slightly apart from the main family cluster, smiling for photos that I suspected would never be displayed anywhere important. Then they took photos without me. Photos of Emma with her mother and David, the family that lived together, celebrated holidays together, made decisions together, the family that made sense. "Now just Emma and her father," the photographer said, and I stepped forward, but she meant David. I stopped mid-step and watched David put his arm around Emma for their father-daughter photo. They looked natural together, comfortable, happy, like they'd been taking father-daughter photos for years instead of just 3. "Should we get one with both fathers?" the photographer asked, clearly trying to be inclusive. Emma looked between David and me, and I saw her face tighten slightly with stress. "Sure," she said, but she didn't sound sure at all. The 3 of us positioned ourselves awkwardly. Emma in the middle, David on one side, me on the other. I could feel the tension in Emma's shoulders, could see the forced nature of her smile. This photo would never see the inside of a frame. This photo would live on someone's computer, a documentation of an uncomfortable moment that everyone would prefer to forget. After the photo session, I found myself standing alone near the bar while the party continued around me. People were dancing, laughing, celebrating. Emma was in the center of it all, radiant and happy, surrounded by friends and family who belonged to her current life. I felt like a time traveler who'd somehow ended up at an event in the wrong era. I had memories and history with the guest of honor, but everyone else belonged to her present and future in ways that I didn't. A woman approached me, someone I didn't recognize, probably one of David's relatives. "You must be so proud," she said warmly. "I am," I said automatically. "Emma is such a lovely girl. David just adores her. He talks about her constantly, how proud he is of her career, how excited he was to help plan this wedding. It's so sweet to see a stepfather care so much." "Yes," I said. "It's wonderful. He's been such a blessing to that family. Emma's mother went through such a hard time with her divorce, and then David came along and just made everything better. Emma needed a stable father figure, and David has been perfect for that role. Emma needed a stable father figure, as if I hadn't been stable, as if the divorce had somehow disqualified me from being the father figure my own daughter needed." "You know David well?" I asked. "Oh yes, we're family. I'm his sister-in-law. I've watched him with Emma over the last few years, and it's just been beautiful to see their relationship develop. He loves her like she's his own flesh and blood. But she was my flesh and blood. She was my daughter first, my daughter always, no matter who else claimed that role. But standing there in the middle of Emma's wedding reception, surrounded by people who saw David as her real father, and me as... what? A guest? A complication? A piece of history that was no longer relevant? Standing there, I realized that biology wasn't enough anymore. Love wasn't enough anymore. 26 years of being Emma's father wasn't enough anymore. What mattered now was presence, consistency, being the one who showed up, who stayed involved, who made things easier instead of more complicated. And somehow, without realizing it was happening, I'd stopped being that person. I'd become the father who used to matter, while David had become the father who mattered now. The party continued around me, but I felt like I was watching it through glass, present but separate, included but not belonging. By midnight, I knew it was time to leave. The reception would probably continue for another hour or two, but I'd seen what I came to see. I'd witnessed my daughter's wedding. I'd watched her dance with her father. I'd listened to her family toast her happiness. I just hadn't been part of any of it. I found Emma near the dance floor, laughing with a group of her college friends. When she saw me approaching, she broke away from the group and came over to hug me. "Are you leaving?" she asked. "I think so. It's been a long day, and I have a drive ahead of me." "Thank you so much for being here," she said. "It means the world to me that you were part of this day." Part of this day. I'd been present for this day, but I wasn't sure I'd been part of it in any meaningful way. "I love you, sweetheart," I said, hugging her tight. "I'm so happy for you." "I love you too, Dad." Dad. She still called me Dad. That was something, I supposed. Even if David was the one who got to be her father in all the ways that mattered, I was still Dad. I walked to my car alone, past groups of guests who were still celebrating, still dancing, still living in the joy of Emma's perfect wedding day. As I drove away from the venue, I could see the lights from the reception tent in my rearview mirror growing smaller and dimmer until they disappeared entirely. I'd attended my daughter's wedding, but I'd never felt more like a stranger in her life. The weeks following Emma's wedding were some of the loneliest of my life. I kept expecting her to call, to share details about the honeymoon, to tell me about married life, to include me in the post-wedding glow that every father hopes to be part of. But the call didn't come. I started paying attention to things I'd been unconsciously ignoring for months, maybe years. Emma's social media, which I'd always followed casually, became a window into a life I was no longer part of. Her Instagram was filled with photos from the honeymoon, beautiful beaches, romantic dinners, adventures with her new husband, but mixed in with the honeymoon photos were older pictures I hadn't noticed before. David was helping Emma hang stockings on a mantelpiece I recognized from my own Christmases in that house. Hiking trips and weekend getaways and ordinary Sunday afternoons, all featuring David in the role I used to fill. The photos told a story I hadn't been aware was being written. A story where David wasn't just Emma's stepfather, but her active, involved, present father. A story where I appeared occasionally, if at all. I scrolled back through months of posts, looking for evidence of my own presence in Emma's life. There were a few photos from my birthday dinner with her 6 months ago, pictures that looked polite and obligatory compared to the natural, candid shots of her with David and her mother. There was a photo from the coffee date we'd managed to squeeze in around her work schedule, where we both looked slightly uncomfortable, like we were trying too hard to recreate something that used to come naturally. But mostly, I was absent from the visual record of Emma's recent life. Her apartment, which I'd visited exactly once since she'd moved in 2 years ago, was decorated with photos that told the same story. Pictures of her college graduation where David stood proudly next to her in his borrowed suit. Pictures of family vacations I hadn't been invited to. Pictures of birthday celebrations and impromptu gatherings and quiet moments that captured a family dynamic I wasn't part of. The photos of us together, the ones from her childhood, from high school, from college, had been moved to less prominent locations, not thrown away, but relegated to a side table or a less visible wall, replaced by more recent memories that didn't include me. I wasn't being erased exactly, but I was being archived, filed away as part of Emma's history rather than part of her present. The most painful discovery was a framed photo on her kitchen counter that I'd somehow missed during my single visit to her apartment. It was from her college graduation, a photo I remembered being taken because I was standing just outside the frame. Emma was in her cap and gown, beaming with pride, flanked by her mother and David. They looked like a complete family celebrating their daughter's achievement. I'd been there that day. I'd been the one who'd helped pay for the education they were celebrating. I'd been the one who'd driven 4 hours to watch her walk across that stage. But I wasn't in the photo that sat in her kitchen, the photo she saw every morning when she made coffee, the photo that represented one of the most important days of her life. I was the one who'd been cropped out. A month after the wedding, I finally called Emma. I'd been waiting for her to call me, waiting for her to include me in her post-wedding life, but the silence had become too loud to ignore. "Hi, Dad," she answered, sounding genuinely happy to hear from me. "How are you?" "I'm good," I said. "How's married life treating you?" "It's wonderful, really wonderful. We're still settling into our routine, but everything feels so natural and right." We talked for about 20 minutes about her honeymoon, her return to work, her new husband's adjustment to married life. It was a pleasant conversation, but I noticed that she didn't ask about my life, didn't inquire about what I'd been doing or how I was feeling or whether I needed anything. It wasn't that she was being rude. It was more like she'd forgotten that I might have a life worth asking about. "I saw some of your photos from the honeymoon," I said. "It looked amazing." "Oh, you're following my Instagram?" I didn't know you were on there much. I check it occasionally. I like seeing what you're up to. That's sweet. David is always commenting on my posts. He says I'm better at capturing memories than anyone he knows. David was commenting on her posts. David was engaged with her social media presence in ways that I'd never thought to be. David was part of her online life, part of the ongoing documentation of her experiences. I was a follower, a passive observer, someone who looked in from the outside rather than participated from within. Maybe we could get together soon, I suggested. It's been a while since we had one of our dinners. That would be nice, she said. Things are pretty busy with work and getting settled, but maybe in a few weeks we could find a time. A few weeks, maybe. Getting settled with her new husband was taking priority over maintaining her relationship with me, and that felt reasonable and hurtful at the same time. Of course, I said. Whenever works for you. After we hung up, I realized that in the 20 minutes we'd talked, Emma hadn't mentioned David once. Not his opinions about the honeymoon, not his adjustment to married life, not his involvement in her settling-in process. It was like she'd learned to edit him out of our conversations the same way I'd been edited out of the photos in her apartment. Not because she didn't love him or value his presence, but because mentioning him might be uncomfortable for me. I'd become someone who required careful management, someone whose feelings needed to be protected by strategic omissions. 2 months after the wedding, Emma started a new job. I learned about it not from her, but from a post on social media celebrating her first day. The post was filled with comments from friends and family congratulating her, offering encouragement, expressing pride in her accomplishment. David had commented, "So proud of you, sweetheart. You're going to be amazing in this new role." Her mother had commented, "Our girl is conquering the world. Love you so much." I scrolled through dozens of comments from college friends, RK colleagues, extended family members, and acquaintances. Everyone seemed to know about this new job. Everyone seemed to be part of Emma's support system as she started this new chapter of her career. I hadn't known she was even looking for a new job. I called her that evening to congratulate her. "Thanks, Dad," she said, sounding pleased, but not surprised that I'd found out. "I'm really excited about it." "When did you start job hunting?" I asked. "I didn't know you were looking to make a change." It's been a few months of networking and interviews. David actually connected me with someone at the company. He has a friend who works there, and she put in a good word for me. David had connected her with the job opportunity. David had been part of her career planning, her professional network, her strategy for advancement. "That's great," I said, trying to keep the disappointment out of my voice. "I'm proud of you." "Thanks. It's going to be a big adjustment, but I think it's the right move for where I want my career to go." Where she wanted her career to go. I'd had no idea she'd been thinking strategically about career moves. I'd had no idea she'd been dissatisfied with her previous job. I'd had no idea she'd been planning a major life change. I used to be the person Emma talked to about career decisions. When she'd been choosing colleges, I'd been part of every conversation. When she'd been looking for her first job after graduation, she'd called me for advice and practice interviews and reassurance about her qualifications. Now she was making major career moves with David's guidance and support, and I was learning about them after the fact through social media posts. "Is there anything I can do to help with the transition?" I asked. "I think I'm all set," she said. "David and Mom have been helping me think through the logistics, and my new husband has been great about adjusting our schedules around my new hours." David and Mom and her new husband, the support system that was helping Emma navigate this major life change, the people whose opinions mattered, whose advice was sought, whose involvement was welcome. I was the person who called to congratulate her after everything had already been decided and implemented. The conversation lasted another 10 minutes, but I spent most of it feeling like I was talking to someone who was being polite to a distant relative, someone who was sharing appropriate information with someone who didn't really need to know the details. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment looking at the walls covered with photos of Emma's childhood, Emma's adolescence, Emma's college years, evidence of a relationship that had once been central to both our lives. But relationships aren't preserved in photographs. They exist in ongoing connection, in current relevance, in being part of each other's daily decisions and major life changes. Looking at those photos, I realized I'd been living in the past tense of my relationship with Emma while she'd been building a present and future that didn't include me in any meaningful way. I wasn't her father anymore, in the ways that mattered. I wasn't her advisor, her confidant, her go-to person for major decisions. I wasn't part of her support system, her daily life, her ongoing story. I was her biological father. I was the man who'd raised her for the first 23 years of her life. I was someone she loved and respected and occasionally called to share good news with. But David was her dad now. David was the one she turned to for advice, for connections, for the kind of ongoing paternal support that shapes a young adult's life. I'd been slowly, quietly, completely replaced. And the most devastating part was that it had happened so gradually, so reasonably, so naturally, that no one had even noticed it was occurring, including me. 3 months after the wedding, on a rainy Thursday evening, my phone rang with Emma's name on the screen. I was making dinner, the same pasta and jarred sauce routine that had become my default, when I saw her call coming through. "Hi, sweetheart," I answered, immediately muting the television and giving her my full attention. "Dad, I have some news," she said, and there was something different in her voice. Excitement, nervousness, joy all mixed together. My heart jumped with possibilities. A promotion at the new job, plans to visit, some problem she needed help with. "What's going on?" I asked. "I'm pregnant." For a moment I couldn't speak. Pregnant. Emma was going to have a baby. I was going to be a grandfather. "Dad, are you there?" "I'm here," I managed. "Oh, Emma. Oh, sweetheart. That's wonderful news. That's incredible news. We just found out yesterday. We're still in shock, but we're so excited." We, Emma and her husband, of course. "How are you feeling?" I asked. "Are you feeling okay? Morning sickness? Do you need anything?" She laughed. "I'm feeling good so far. A little tired, but nothing too bad. We have our first appointment with the doctor next week." "That's exciting. The first ultrasound is amazing. I'd wait until you see that little heartbeat on the screen." "David is so excited," she said, and I felt that familiar stab of displacement. "He's already talking about converting the spare room into a nursery, and Mom is over the moon. She's already looking at baby furniture and making lists of things we'll need." David and Mom, the grandparents who were making plans, getting excited, preparing for the arrival of this baby. "I'm excited too," I said, though I realized she hadn't mentioned my excitement, hadn't included me in the list of people who were thrilled about this news. "I know you are," she said. "I can hear it in your voice." We talked for another 20 minutes about due dates and doctor's appointments and all the normal things expectant parents discuss. But as we talked, I found myself wondering where I would fit into this new phase of Emma's life. Would I be a grandfather who got regular updates and occasional visits? Would I be included in baby showers and family celebrations? Or would I be the politely acknowledged grandfather who received photos by text and birthday invitations sent out of obligation? "Have you started thinking about names?" I asked. "A little bit. We have some ideas, but nothing definite yet. David has some family names he'd like us to consider." David had family names to contribute. Of course he did. "I'd love to share some of the family names from our side, too," I said carefully. "Your grandmother's name was Rose, and she was such a special woman, and my father's name was Robert. We could call a boy Bobby." There was a pause. "Oh, that's sweet. We'll definitely consider all the family options." "We'll consider all the family options." Translation: David's suggestions would be seriously discussed, while mine would be politely acknowledged and forgotten. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen thinking about what it would mean to be a grandfather in this new family structure. Would my grandchild know me as Grandpa? Or would David be Grandpa while I was relegated to some lesser title that didn't conflict with the real family hierarchy? Would I be invited to important moments? First steps, first words, birthday parties. Or would I be the grandfather who got a phone call after the fact, and maybe a photo by text? Would this baby grow up knowing that I'd been Emma's father for 26 years? Or would they just know me as some distant relative who visited occasionally? 2 weeks later, Emma called again. "We have an update," she said. "We went to the doctor today and everything looks perfect. We got to see the baby on the ultrasound, and it's just incredible." "That's wonderful," I said. "How exciting that must have been." "It was amazing." David was crying. I've never seen him so emotional. And Mom was there too, so she got to see her first grandchild on the screen. David and Mom were there, at the first ultrasound, the first glimpse of my grandchild. "You were at the appointment together?" I asked. David took the day off work to come with us, and Mom met us there. It was so special to share that moment with everyone. Everyone. Meaning the people who mattered, the people who belonged to Emma's current family structure. I would have loved to be there too, I said quietly. There was a pause, a long pause that felt heavy with everything we hadn't been talking about for years. Oh, Emma said finally. It was a pretty small appointment room, and with my husband and David and Mom, it was already kind of crowded. Too crowded for the baby's other grandfather, too complicated to include the biological father in the family moment. I understand, I said, but I didn't understand. I didn't understand how I'd become someone whose presence would overcomplicate a simple family moment. I could ask the doctor if you could come to the next appointment, she offered, clearly hearing something in my voice. Don't worry about it, I said. I don't want to make things complicated. But as soon as I said it, I realized how tired I was of that phrase. I was tired of not wanting to make things complicated. I was tired of being understanding. I was tired of gracefully accepting my diminished role in Emma's life. Actually, I said, surprising myself, I would really like to be included. Another pause. I know this is hard to navigate, I continued, finding words I'd been holding back for years. I know the family situation is implicated now, but, Emma, I'm going to be this baby's grandfather too. I want to be part of these moments. I want to share in this joy with you. Dad, she started, but I wasn't finished. I've been trying so hard to be understanding, to not make waves, to accept whatever role I'm given in your life. But I miss you, Emma. I miss being your father in ways that matter. I miss being included in your big moments, and your daily life, and your important decisions. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, but she wasn't saying anything. I know David is important to you, I continued. I know he's been there for you in ways that I haven't been able to be since the divorce, and I'm grateful that you have that support. But I'm your father, too. I've been your father for 26 years, and I'd like to continue being your father in whatever way you'll let me. Dad, she said quietly, I didn't know you felt like that. How could you know? I never told you. I never said anything when the Sunday dinner stopped, or when David started being included in things that used to be just ours, or when I got demoted to the back row at your wedding. I just kept being understanding and supportive and grateful for whatever scraps of involvement I was offered. I never meant for you to feel like you were getting scraps. But that's what it's been, Emma. That's what my relationship with you has become. I get updates after decisions are made. I get invited to events where I'll be managed and seated appropriately so I don't cause awkwardness. I get polite phone calls where you share news that everyone else already knows. She was quiet for a long moment. I didn't realize, she said finally. I thought I was being considerate of everyone's feelings. I thought I was making things easier. Easier for everyone except me. I never wanted to hurt you. I know that. And I know that loving David doesn't mean you love me less. But Emma, being replaced in your life has been the most painful thing I've ever experienced. Watching another man walk you down the aisle, listening to him give the father of the bride toast, seeing him included in all the moments that I thought would be ours. It's been heartbreaking. I could hear her crying softly. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry, Dad. I never meant for it to happen that way. I know you didn't. But it did happen that way. And now you're having a baby, and I'm terrified that I'm going to be the grandfather who gets managed and scheduled and kept at a safe distance so I don't complicate the real family dynamic. You're not going to be kept at a distance. But I already am at a distance, Emma. I have been for years. I just haven't said anything about it because I didn't want to be the difficult ex-husband who made things hard for everyone. We were both quiet for a moment, the weight of years of unspoken hurt hanging between us. What do you want? She asked finally. I want to be your father again. Not your only father. I understand that David is important to you and always will be. But I want to be included in your life in ways that matter. I want to be consulted about decisions that affect our family. I want to be invited to important moments, not as an afterthought, but as someone who belongs there. Okay, she said. We can work on that. And I want to be a real grandfather to this baby, not a distant figure who gets mentioned occasionally, but someone who's actively involved in their life. You will be, I promise. I want to come to a doctor's appointment, not because there's room for me, but because I'm this baby's grandfather and I want to be there. Okay, I'll talk to my husband about it, and we'll figure out the logistics. Talk to her husband about it. Even this conversation, this request to be included in my grandchild's life, had to be discussed and approved by other people. But it was something. It was the first honest conversation Emma and I had had in years about where I fit in her life. I love you, Emma, I said. I've always loved you and I always will, but I can't keep being understanding if understanding means disappearing from your life. I love you too, Dad, and I don't want you to disappear. I never wanted that. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen feeling emotionally exhausted but somehow lighter. I'd finally said what I'd been thinking for years. I'd finally stopped being the understanding ex-husband who accepted whatever role he was assigned. I'd finally found my voice. Whether anything would actually change remained to be seen, but at least Emma knew now that I wasn't content to be a peripheral figure in her story. At least she knew that I wanted to be her father again, not just the man who used to be. The change didn't happen overnight. How could it? Years of patterns and assumptions and carefully constructed family dynamics don't shift because of one honest conversation. But something did begin to change, slowly and sometimes awkwardly, in the weeks following my phone call with Emma. She called me 3 days later with an invitation. "We have another doctor's appointment next Tuesday," she said. "Would you like to come?" It was a simple question, but it felt like a doorway opening after years of being closed. "I would love that," I said. "Great, it's at 2 o'clock. I can text you the address." On Tuesday, I arrived at the doctor's office 10 minutes early and sat in my car, nervous in a way that felt both familiar and strange. I hadn't been nervous about seeing Emma in years, but this felt like a first date or a job interview, an opportunity that I could easily mess up. Emma and her husband arrived right on time, and I could see them talking in their car before getting out, probably discussing how to handle this new dynamic, how to include me without making things weird, how to navigate having both of Emma's fathers present for family moments. "Hi, Dad," Emma said, giving me a warm hug when they approached. "Thanks for coming." Her husband shook my hand and smiled, and I could tell he was making an effort to be welcoming despite whatever reservations he might have about this arrangement. In the waiting room, we sat together making small talk about Emma's pregnancy symptoms, her work schedule, the preparations they were making at home. It felt almost normal, like we were just a family waiting for a routine appointment. Then David arrived. He paused in the doorway when he saw me, clearly surprised. Emma had apparently not told him I was coming. "Oh," he said. "Hi." "Hi, David," I replied, standing to shake his hand. Emma looked back and forth between us, her face tight with stress. "I thought it would be nice to have both of you here," she said, but her voice suggested she was second-guessing that decision. The waiting room suddenly felt crowded with emotions and history and the complexity of loving the same person from different angles. David sat down across from us, and we spent the next 10 minutes in polite, awkward conversation about work and weather, and anything except the fact that we were both there in our capacity as Emma's father. When Emma's name was called, we all stood up. Should everyone come back?" Emma asked the nurse uncertainly. "How many people?" the nurse asked, looking at our group. "4, Emma said. "My husband, and my 2 fathers. 2 fathers. She'd said it out loud, acknowledged that we were both there in the same role, both important enough to be included in this moment. The nurse looked momentarily confused, but then shrugged. "The room is small, but we can make it work." We crowded into the small examination room, David and me standing awkwardly against the wall while Emma's husband held her hand and the doctor prepared the ultrasound equipment. "Let's see how baby is doing," the doctor said cheerfully, apparently unaware of the family complexity in the room. The screen came to life, and there was my grandchild, tiny, perfect, with a strong heartbeat that filled the room with its rapid rhythm. Emma started crying immediately, and her husband kissed her forehead. David stepped forward to get a better look at the screen, his eyes filled with wonder. "That's your grandchild," Emma said, looking at both David and me. "Both of yours. Both of yours. Equal claim, equal joy, equal importance in this tiny person's life." I found myself crying too, overwhelmed by the miracle on the screen and by Emma's words. She was making room for both of us. She was acknowledging that this baby would have 2 grandfathers who loved them, 2 grandfathers who wanted to be part of their story. After the appointment, we stood in the parking lot having the kind of conversation that felt both momentous and completely ordinary. "The baby looks perfect," David said, and his voice was thick with emotion. "Absolutely perfect," I agreed. "We should probably start thinking about logistics," Emma said. "Holidays, visits, how we want to handle having everyone involved without making things too complicated." Everyone involved. She was planning a future that included all of us, planning for complexity instead of trying to avoid it. We'll figure it out, David said, looking at me. We're both adults. We can make this work for Emma and the baby. It was the first time David and I had ever directly acknowledged our shared role in Emma's life. The first time we'd spoken to each other as equals instead of replacement and replaced. Over the next few months, we did figure it out, slowly, with some trial and error, with occasional awkwardness and miscommunications, but we figured it out. Emma started calling me more often, not just to share major news, but to talk about ordinary things, how she was feeling, concerns about the pregnancy, excitement about preparing the nursery. She asked for my opinion about baby names, including the family names I'd suggested, about parenting approaches, about balancing work and family. She included me in baby shower planning, asking me to help put together a photo slideshow of her childhood. It was the first time in years that she'd asked me to contribute something meaningful to a family celebration. At the baby shower, David and I both gave speeches. His was about gaining a daughter and now becoming a grandfather for the first time. Mine was about watching my little girl become a mother and how proud I was of the woman she'd become. Neither speech mentioned the other, but they didn't need to. We were both there, both acknowledged, both important to Emma's story. When Emma went into labor, she called both of us. "It's time," she said, and I could hear the excitement and nervousness in her voice. "We're heading to the hospital." David and I arrived within minutes of each other and spent the next several hours in the waiting room together. We talked about Emma's childhood, shared stories about her growing up, compared notes about the challenges and joys of being her father. It was strange and wonderful to have someone else who understood what it meant to love Emma the way a father loves a daughter, someone else who worried about her happiness, who was proud of her accomplishments, who wanted to protect her from pain. When the baby was born, a healthy girl with Emma's eyes and her father's nose, we were both invited into the room to meet our granddaughter. Emma was exhausted but radiant, holding this tiny person who represented the future of our complicated family. "Dad," she said, looking at me, "would you like to hold your granddaughter?" Your granddaughter, not the baby or her, your granddaughter. I held that tiny person and felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt essential, not opti. Oh, now, not peripheral, not carefully managed, but essential to this moment, essential to this family, essential to this story. "What's her name?" I asked. "Rose," Emma said, smiling at me. "Rose Catherine. Rose for your grandmother, Catherine for David's mother." Both family names, both grandfathers honored in their granddaughter's identity. David held Rose next, and she looked so small in his large hands. "She's perfect," he said, tears streaming down his face. "Absolutely perfect." In the months that followed, we established new patterns, new traditions, new ways of being a family that included both of Emma's fathers. It wasn't always smooth. There were scheduling conflicts and miscommunications and moments of awkwardness when old hurts surfaced unexpectedly. But we made it work because we all loved Emma, and we all loved Rose, and love was bigger than the complications that love sometimes creates. I babysit Rose every other Saturday while Emma and her husband have date nights. David babysits on the alternating Saturdays. We both attend birthday parties and doctor's appointments and family gatherings. We both read bedtime stories and push swings at the playground and take hundreds of photos of every milestone. Rose has two grandfathers who adore her, and she seems perfectly comfortable with that arrangement. She calls me Papa and David Grandpa, and she lights up when either of us walks into a room. Emma and I have coffee dates again, not monthly obligations that get rescheduled, but regular times when we talk about her life, her work, her hopes for Rose's future. She asks for my advice about parenting decisions and career moves and the ordinary challenges of adult life. I'm part of her story again. Not the only important part, not the way I was when she was young and I was her only father, but part of her story in ways that matter, ways that count, ways that make me feel like I belong to her life instead of just visiting it occasionally. The relationship isn't what it used to be. It can't be. Too much has happened. Much has changed. Too many years passed when we were both pretending that distance was the same thing as peace. But it's something real and honest and worth fighting for. It's a relationship built on the foundation of 26 years of being Emma's father, but constructed to fit the reality of who we are now, who David is in our lives, who Rose is in our hearts. I'm learning to be a father in a blended world, to share space without losing my place, to love Emma and Rose without needing to be the only one who loves them that way. It's not the story I thought I'd be living when Emma was 5 years old and spinning around our living room in her princess dress. But it's a good story. It's a true story. It's a story where love makes room for complications, where families can be redefined without being destroyed, where fathers can be replaced and restored simultaneously. Rose will grow up knowing that she's loved by many people in many different ways. She'll know that families can be complicated and beautiful at the same time. She'll know that love doesn't diminish when it's shared. It multiplies, and I'll be there for it all, not as the only grandfather, but as one of the grandfathers, not as Emma's only father, but as one of her fathers, present, involved, essential. Finally, after all these years, essential again.